All right, guys, we're talking the 110 tonight. As always, let's get started by getting a baseline by going over some trades. Are you going DeAndre Swift or the 110?
The 110.
I would like the 110 as well, please. No, that is incorrect. I will take DeAndre Swift.
How about the 110 or Mac Jones?
The 110. As much as it hurts me to say the 110, I'm good with it.
I would take Mac Jones if it was Mac Jones in the 111 for the 110. But if it's not, I'm going to take the 110. Your next ask is going to be my guy.
Yeah. How about the 110 or Kenny Pickett?
The 110. Come on.
Man, this is close. Man, yeah, I feel about Kenny Pickett, but yeah, I'm going to take the pick.
Let's move over to 1QB. Are you taking the 110 or Deontay Johnson?
Oh, Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, that's a smash at Deontay Johnson. That's thievery.
The 110 or George Pickens?
We're going George Pickens.
So I'm actually being forced to do rankings for DLF right now. So let me just go see where I have George Pickens. I have George Pickens at 59 overall right now. And the rookie 110 at 61. It looks like I take George Pickens over the pick. Barely. And it could move in the next hour.
How about the 110 or Mike Evans?
Pick.
That 110. Whoever the player is has a chance to mature, appreciate, and value. Mike Evans has no chance of appreciating a value at any point from now until the moment he retires. He's on the descending slope of his career.
Just understanding where you get from an impact standpoint, warp standpoint, whatever you want to call it, you're getting not really much of an advantage with Mike Evans anyway. So why buy yourself into a descending asset that you're not sure is even in a good situation? Feels like you can have the pick. The pick's more flexible. Sure, you end up picking a receiver there, even if they're not any better than Mike Evans. In fact, they probably will be worse than Mike Evans. The odds are to have a worse career. But I think just from an asset standpoint, that's not what you'd want to do with draft picks because you figure you can make that trade in August. It's still going to be there. Something like it. Maybe not Mike Evans, but someone else in the same range. So just take the pick if you're dealing with players in that range.
Okay, well, let's pull up the board. Scott, we'll start with you. So 101, Bijan, of course. 102, we have Anthony Richardson. 103, CJ Stroud. Next at 104 is Bryce Young. Jahmyr Gibbs at 105. JSN at 106. Will Levis at 107. Quentin Johnston at 108. Jordan Addison was your pick last show at 109. What are we doing here with the 110?
I'm starting to look at Johnston, Addison, and Zay Flowers as just a tier. We just did a startup. They went back to back to back, literally, in the startup. And I think any of them could go ahead of the others in the NFL draft. Any of them could go to a great landing spot. Any of them could go to a bad landing spot. Given that, I think the only difference in Zay Flowers is probably he's a year older and he's not an early declare, but that's it. Everything else is very similar. So I think he fits right here in this tier of these three receivers. When you see one go, probably expect the next couple picks the other ones are going to go. I know Shane's probably going to disagree with this pick because he would have taken Zach Charbonnet already, like we have seen on his board. But I think these receivers are in the same tier. They're all going to go in this kind of 8 to 11 range. So I'll just take Zay Flowers at 110. Then it gets a little wild after that. But I think he's the last piece of a tier in a receiver tier of 3.
All right, Shane, let's check out your board. It looks like you went Zay Flowers, the pick before this at 109. But let's start back at the beginning. You went Bijan, CJ Stroud at 102, Bryce Young at 103, Anthony Richardson at 104, Jahmyr Gibbs at 105, Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 106, Levis at 107, Charbonnet at 108, Zay Flowers at 109. What are you doing here, sir, in your superflex board?
Look, I don't even like this guy, but I have to take him at 110. Quentin Johnston. I can't imagine he falls to 110 on any board other than a draft that's filled with me. You know what I mean? Which would not be
Shane's.
Yeah, like 12 of me just drafting. Oh, that would be terrible. I don't even know how we'd pull off any trades. I'm sure we'd have to reverse multiple trades for confusion purposes. But I'll go Quentin Johnston here. The upside, I guess it exists. I don't want to sell him too much because clearly I don't like him that much. If I did like him, I would have picked him much earlier than this. We were talking before we came on air behind the scenes, and I was saying that I think I'd rather trade this pick than make this pick, especially if the board breaks the way that I have it. I was even considering going Josh Downs here over Quentin Johnston, but I guess at some point you just have to draft Quentin Johnston. All the quarterbacks are gone. All the running backs that I want, they're not all gone. But he's going to have first-round draft capital, right? That's what we expect. I hope the NFL does the right thing and lets him fall to the third round, so this isn't even a consideration, and I can draft a running back like I want to, as I probably should have. But for now, I'll take Quentin Johnston, and then I'll look to sell him on the first piece of camp hype when they show some amazing body catch that he makes, and the stands go wild.
We want to get up. If we want to move up in this draft, we want to get into that magical top 6, right? So are you going to give the 110 and let's say 111 in Superflex to move up to 106?
It's easy to say that I'll do that before the NFL draft, right? Because I don't know how many running backs are going to get day 2 capital. Let's just live in an imaginary world where 5 running backs get day 2 capital or better. One of them will have day 1 capital. We know that. So 4 of them get day 2 capital. I might not be willing to trade at that point because I think I can get a running back at that spot. Matter of fact, I know I can get a running back at that spot that I'll probably want to just get and draft.
Yeah, I think the hard part is if you just move into the 106, you're subject to whatever's on the board. It's a good pick. It's the last pick of the tier, like we talked about in the 106 video. But if you're sitting there eyeing a quarterback or a running back, I guess those would be probably the 2 positions people would go, I want to get into a certain tier to get. Shane's right. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, I think I talked to someone else that I really respect the other night about Gibbs versus JSN. And in the current landscape, the argument being it's JSN. It's really not even close. Yeah, Gibbs is a running back. He's probably a little more scarce. But if you're telling me which player has both potential, I mean, we still think JSN can be productive, right? He may not be elite, but we think he can be just as good as Gibbs relative to the receivers. But which one has probably the market cachet that you'll be able to flip or move around or be flexible? You know, as soon as you draft Gibbs, he's a running back, has to be a perfect situation. And there's a lot of people that just won't pay for running backs. They'll take him if he's there, but they don't want to give you probably what you want. So then I'm kind of sitting at 106 going, okay, if it's JSN that I'm after, he may be gone. If it's Gibbs that I'm after, he may be gone. But especially if it's Gibbs, I'm with Shane. If I can get 2 running backs that go in the top 75 or better, okay, it's not Gibbs, but it's Charbonnet and Tyjae Spears. And I think the way the market is and the way that I'm probably building my team, I'd rather have the 2. What is truly the difference between Tyjae Spears and Jahmyr Gibbs, other than Jahmyr Gibbs played at Alabama and Tyjae Spears played at Tulane? Now, Spears is a year older. He has more of an injury history, but is there that big of a difference where you go, okay, are you willing to sell 2 of these for one of those? Probably not. Now, if it's a quarterback that falls to 106, totally different story. And I think that's where Shane's kind of hedging his bets. But at the same time, I don't think you make this deal post-NFL draft. It's either going to be on the table or it's not. And if it's on the table post-NFL draft, guess what? You probably don't want it as much. If it's off the table, it's because it's clear that there's a reason that 106 is going to be available, and it's because of X, Y, or Z. So I think you just kind of have to make a bet if it's a quarterback that you want. I've said this to a couple of subscribers that have messaged me over the last couple of days. Man, I don't want to overpay to move up in the draft. Okay, but if you have the 112 and you can get to the 108 now, which pick do you have a better shot at getting to the 106 with? Probably the 108 versus the 112.
Yep.
So maybe you pay a little bit more. You take all the risk now making that deal. But man, what if you miss that tier by 1 pick? It's going to be a lot easier to go up a pick or 2 closer to the draft than it is, man, how do I get to that 105 from the 112? And I think all of us would go, man, a long way to get there.
It's going to cost your 24 first if you want to do that.
At least. It's almost like the 112 doesn't add a whole lot of value. I'll take it because it's a free pick, but it doesn't add a lot to push the needle for me to accept the trade. So I'm torn. I think if I have a specific reason to move up, I'd do it. And just bet that, hey, I'm at the 106. I'm within the tier. If I have to try to pay more to get to the 104 or the 105, I'll do it. But that's my only path. My path getting from the 111 and 112 or 110 and 111 up to the top 6, it's going to be very hard once it becomes a consensus.
Okay, so we're going to talk more about the 110 and some actionable advice, go over some more trades, look at our 1 QB board. But first, if you wouldn't mind, look down, hit that little like, give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate that. Easiest way to help out the channel. Okay, so let's do a quick trade here. Would you go the 110 or the 202, 204, and the 310?
I'm going to take in the 202 and the 204. I'm probably a little biased when it comes to that type of move because we all will look at the tier of players and go, man, I can't trade from that tier of players. But like Shane said, especially if you go to Shane's board, Shane has Charbonnet and Zay Flowers, and then, he's different than where I was in pick 8 and 9. So that just tells you right there that at least between the two of us, the tiers go into at least the 112, if not the 201. And all it's going to take is one or two other players to jump in there. And I'd rather have the 2 shots. So I think I'll take the package there.
I am going to disagree with Scott because at this point, I'm going to be shooting for my guy. I know that's not the right move. You should just take the chance on the numbers, but the 310 is essentially useless. If you go back and look at the 310s, rarely, if ever, does that turn into anything. The 202, 204, you get 2 bets at it, right? I do understand that, but I prefer to hold on to the 110 and at least make the choice, or at least have the determination of I'm taking who I kind of want there, as opposed to whoever falls to me.
I'll just stray away real quick from Shane's answer because I don't disagree with him. It's not as easy as I made it sound. I think if you said, hey, I have something very specific I want to do with this 110 and it does not involve committing to move back just yet, fine. But you've started to see Hendon Hooker sniffing late first round of drafts. That's another player that's going to go in this range. Running backs, we already talked about that. If you're getting into 1.75 or 2 PPR for tight ends, you got 2 or 3 tight ends that are going to be in this range. There might even be people that go 1.5 PPR. We probably wouldn't do it, but hey, instead of drafting one of 3 receivers in this tier, just give me that Michael Mayer. So I do think there is enough variance to where if you have a couple leagues where you have the 110, I don't hate one where you go, okay, I'm going to try to trade up. And then the other one, I'm going to take the 202 and the 204 and just have a little fun with those picks and just bank that the tiers are going to maybe expand a little bit more. So I think you can do multiple things. I would say for me, playing in a ton of leagues, the leagues where I'm not moving anywhere but back from here is the ones where it's 14 team super flex, 1.75 PPR, 2 tight end, point per carry. All of those leagues, I look at these picks and I go, I really don't care who you take at 109 or 110 because I'm going to get somebody at 112, 201, 202 that the only difference is you get to pick, but I don't feel as bad if I miss on the pick because I just took whatever's there and it's a flat tier. For the listeners, I think that's important. If you're just in a stock league, PPR, okay, don't trade out of this tier is easy. But if you're in some of the more complex leagues like we're in, especially a start 11, 12, you're definitely doing that.
Start 11, you better trade back. There's no reason at all to hold on to the 110 and think that you're going to go, I need Tyjae Spears here, and that's somehow better than Israel Abandaconda. I think I said that name right. I'm really proud of myself. And someone at 204 and then a 310. You want as many shots as you can in a start 11. Chances are one of those guys at least is going to start for you, if not 2 of them, multiple weeks.
So if you're in one of the 1 QB 10 team start 8s, you pretty much recommend sticking with the 110 as opposed to going for a couple seconds, right? That's basically where we were getting at there. The deeper you go, the more likely you are to take the package. Okay, so the first thing you would do, obviously you would trade the 110 for a 24 first. Would you first try to buy a vet, or would you first try to move it back to 24? What's your action item? First thing you're looking at doing when you see that 110, what's the first thing you're doing?
First thing I'm doing is looking to kick the 24. The vets that I can buy with the 110, unless it's that Deontay Johnson trade that you threw at us earlier, probably aren't the best moves to make. Again, there's motivated sellers. You can always find someone that's willing to make a bad move. If someone in your league is silly and they want to sell Devonta Smith for the 110 because they just love rookie picks, well, you take Devonta Smith. But more likely, they're not going to do that. So what you should do is try to kick that to 24.
Yeah, it's interesting because we look at these receivers, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison. Nobody's enamored with any of them. I have to have that guy. Otherwise, they'd be where JSN is because I don't think JSN's guaranteed to get drafted any higher than those 3. But there's obviously name cachet, traits, a bunch of stuff that goes along with his profile that has him in the tier where he is, and then the other 3 are in a tier below. But we're also not very good at looking at these tiers and saying, I know which ones are going to be really good and I know which ones are going to be okay. We are good as a community to say, I know how to spot a good receiver. College production, metrics, draft capital. You put those 3 things together. I mean, a lot of people have done the research on how to pick good receivers and how to not pick good receivers. We're good at finding the Jerry Jeudy types. Like, we're good at hitting on that type. And that's no slander on him. But what we're bad at is going, okay, this guy will go in this range. And I'm thinking the CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson range, right? People had those guys ranked in any different order. But if I would have told you one would be elite, one would be very good, and one would be solid, you might have had different bets on all three. And people could have pointed you to reasons why, well, Judy's better than Lamb and Jefferson's better than Judy, but we don't know. So I don't think it is a bad idea to go, okay, I want to get at least some exposure to all three of those guys instead of a Brandon Ayuk, instead of a Jerry Jeudy, because do those guys really have any market upside? Not really. Not really. They are what they are. So you may miss, but it also feels like, man, if you're trying to draft yourself into better assets or assets you can push forward, I don't hate doing the pick here over those veterans. And I think a month ago I would have been like, get me out of these picks. But now the more I look into it, I think we're going to have three pretty strong first-round receivers here.
Would you trade this 110 for the defending champions 24 first?
Can you sell the defending champion that it's his 24 first and then he needs to give you a little bit more? Needs to give you an extra second, or he needs to give you an extra throw-in running back or something like that. You know what? I'm okay with it. There's a lot of defending champions from last year that I'm like, okay, yeah, they're solid, but I'm not scared of their roster that they're just going to repeat year after year after year. I mean, how many defending champs won because they were the 4th seed and they had no Bills or Bengals on Monday Night Football? Doesn't mean they have the best team. That could be the 107, 108 next year or better. So I'm okay doing that.
Okay, so Scott, we're looking at your 1QB board here. Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, JSN went 103, Quentin Johnston 104, Jordan Addison at 105, Zay Flowers at 106, Jalen Hyatt at 107, Zach Charbonnet at 108, and Spears at 109. It's looking lovely here at the 110 and a single QB. Who you going to 110?
It's definitely not looking too lovely because it's one of those picks where you're either going to draft a player just strictly based on what you think their capital is going to be, which is what I did with Tyjae Spears and Zach Charbonnet. You could argue both of those guys go much higher if they get second-round capital, probably above Hyatt for sure. I just think Hyatt's a better bet for capital. But now you're looking at the receivers. Honestly, if I had to bet right now where we're talking about this pick, I don't think there's another receiver that goes in the top 40, maybe top 50, but I don't want to take a receiver here. But I also know that there's probably 5 or 6 running backs that could go in the 3rd round, and which one do I want to bet on? So I'm going to go out on a limb. The only other consideration would be, okay, if you need a quarterback, this is the range where you could start considering, okay, do I take Anthony Richardson? I don't want to do it. Very rare circumstances am I going to pull the trigger. I'm going to literally do anything I can to try to trade for a quarterback instead. But you could consider it if you're at the very end of the first and you have one of those 1QB teams where it's like my quarterback is Jared Goff and Mac Jones. And you're just literally getting crushed every week at quarterback, and no one will trade you the positional advantage guys unless you pay them 3 firsts, So I'm going to pick at this spot a guy that I hope goes in the 3rd round. I'm going to take Kendre Miller, running back from TCU. And it's just next best running back on my board, but if he goes in the mid 4th round and he's RB10, then this pick goes up in smoke. But that would be my pick, Kendre Miller.
All right, Shane, we're looking at your board now, and we actually skipped you in the last show. We did not do a 109 pick for you, so you're going to do the 109 and 110 today. So Bijan Robinson at 101, Gibbs at 102, JSN at 103, Charbonnet at 104, Jordan Addison at 105, Zay Flowers was next at 106, Quentin Johnston at 107, 108 was A-Chain. So who you going at 109?
I'm going to go Tyjae Spears. I'm going to mix it up here a little bit. I think Spears will have day 2 draft capital. If he doesn't, then I'll pivot off of this pick, obviously, and pick someone else. But right now, I feel pretty secure taking him and thinking that'll be a safe pick. I don't want to take any more wide receivers in this range. And I already took a little baby tiny running back, so now I'm going to take a full-size one.
Okay, and then 110. Who you going? This show. We're going to include you in this one.
Oh, cool. I love back-to-back picks. My running back room's looking pretty good in this draft. I'm not going to lie to you. Josh Downs. I'm just going to take Josh Downs. I can't commit to low-ceiling tight end right now, so I'm going to go Downs. I don't expect him to do well, but if he does pop, I expect him to pop heavy. I don't know if that analogy makes sense or if that description makes any sense.
So is there any difference between single QB and super flex as to whether you would want to go running back or wide receiver? Is there any kind of correlation, or is the only difference between super flex and single QB is the QB?
It's very common in our one QB subscriber teams we often see running backs are more valued in the leagues than typical.
Right.
And I think because usually they're shallower. How often do we see a 1 QB start 12? Very rarely.
Never.
And that's because 12 team start 12 superflex. There's 2 extra spots there that are essentially quarterbacks. 1 QB, it's usually start 8, start 9, start 10 in a 1 QB is a lot. 12 teams start 10, 1 QB is actually considered kind of deep because there's no quarterbacks that are going to matter as much. So I think running backs in those, just because the quarterbacks are completely out, typically the total scoring is a lot lower in a 1 QB, meaning there's not that second quarterback there to drive the total point volume up, which means the impact is going to be easier felt at running back. Whereas I think a lot of times in our Superflex league, we're like, man, if we have the 2 elite quarterbacks, you can get away with not needing the running backs as much. So I'm just anecdotal. We see a lot more, hey, I'm in a 1 QB start 9. What matters most in this league? Running backs. Hammer running backs. That's what everybody wants. Receivers, I can find receivers. And a lot of times that's the case when you're talking about receivers in this range of the draft. So I think running backs, I would say, give the tie break in 1 QB.
All right, so let's do a couple more trades. So back to Superflex, 12-team Superflex, start 10 PPR. Would you rather have T. Higgins or Rashad Bateman and the 110?
Shane, curious where you're at on this one.
So we're going to need Clay to read that again.
How were you going to answer it? Were you going to wait for me to answer and hopefully
I hope
somehow
that you said most of the names? I just hope that he said all the names.
Shane, it was a 12-team Superflex PPR start 10. Are you going T. Higgins or Rashad Bateman and the 110?
T. Higgins. Rashad Bateman, again, going to my rankings, but no, I think I've made it plain that I believe Rashad Bateman is not good. He hasn't shown us anything to believe that he's good. He's been a face planter 2 straight seasons, not just 1. He was like, hey, I enjoyed not being good so much in my rookie season. I'm going to follow that up and do the same thing in my sophomore season. I don't want to hear the excuses that he was injured. I don't want to hear excuses that he didn't have a quarterback, blah, 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 blah. Rashad Bateman means nothing to me, especially if it's included in the package for me giving up T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference in that trade is I'm hesitant when it's the 110 and Rashad Bateman. I'm okay with the Bateman pivot if I'm getting 24 first on top, but that means you've done the work and now you're sending me the random 24 first and I'm getting the receiver back. That's the leverage trade. When you're trying to send me one of these back end firsts, in theory, you could say, well, just go trade that 110 for a 24 first, but that's easier said than done. It might only be getting done in half the leagues. So if you can get that done, then I'm willing to accept it. But as it is, if you're just sending me a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and a late first, kind of feels like I need you to do a little work with one of those assets, and then I'll accept the trade. So I would take the Higgins side.
Juju Smith-Schuster and the 202 or the 110?
Ooh, that's like a free Juju, Shane.
You get an excellent wide receiver 4 there, which is always helpful to the flex position, I guess, if you're struggling for a flex. 110, I'm guessing if I'm on the board, I already know who I like, and I'd rather just go to war with them than go through the drama, or I wouldn't even call it drama, but the disappointment that is Juju Smith-Schuster. Set your expectations accordingly. If you expect 11 to 13 points, you're going to be ecstatic. That's what he's going to get you, but that's all he's ever going to get you. I'll just shoot for the upside with the 110 and hope for better.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually might consider the package there because would you take the 202 and a 24 second for the 110?
No, Juju is the problem here. The second, if it's the 201, I'll take Juju in the 201. How about that? You want to give me the 201 and Juju? You can have the 110.
Okay, so it's 1 pick then, right?
So it's not the 202, it's got to be the 201?
It's got to be the 201.
I'm just wondering, could you get a second for Juju? And if you could, I mean, could you get the 206 for Juju? And all of a sudden, it's like,
I don't want it. Look, you know what? You add too many middling pieces to your roster, and then that's what your roster becomes. A bunch of Juju Smith-Schusters, Jacoby Myers, Cortland Suttons, 13 second-round picks, and you look and you go, I can't compete any week. Like every week, my wide receivers are giving me a nice, healthy 40 points, which is, not terrible, not good. It's in that warm, lukewarm, warm oatmeal. It's not very
Ish.
appetizing. Ish.
Warm oatmeal.
Yeah. Warm oatmeal, not hot, right? You want it a little hot.
That's the mistake. I just eat the oatmeal straight out of the package. Don't add water. Don't
That
heat
would
it
make
up.
me cough.
Pour it in your mouth.
The oatmeal dust.
What a savage. Okay, so what is one last piece of advice that you would give to somebody who had the 110?
Well, the good news is you're probably a good team if it was your own pick. You just missed out on the finals / however they determine the draft order. You're probably a contending team. Don't be biased on what players you're going to get, especially if it's one of these formats where there's multiple premiums. If it's just a stock league and it's start 9, then shoot for the best player you can get. I will say this is a class where I think the name cachet is going to ride higher this year than it ever has, at least that I can remember. People are going to stick to their guns, even if it doesn't follow what happens in the NFL draft. The names that you know, the names that you like, I tend to think they're going to be a little more valuable this year than they would have in years past, because I think a lot of people have already accepted, man, there's a really flat tier in this range, and there's a flat tier in the second to third round, and it's kind of like, do I really want to take this guy here, or do I want to ride with the name that everyone's liked for 3 years? So just kind of remember that. Remember who had the good profiles before you knew any of this stuff, and go, if I can justify tie breaking with that player over that other guy that I had never heard of 3 months ago, maybe go the guy that people liked. Like, that's the player where it's, man, one big game, I could turn him into a future first. Josh Downs, really good profile. Why would you take Josh Downs? Not because he can't be duplicated by 5 or 6 other receivers here, but you know what? Josh Downs goes 9 for 100 in his first game. People are going, this is the next Brandon Cooks. This is the next Tyler Lockett. I'll get him now before he ascends in a range where I have to, pay double what I am. So I think use the names as tiebreakers, because this truly is a flat range. I don't see that changing. Even if the names are different than what we're talking about tonight, where NFL is going to draft a lot of good players in the first 2 or 3 rounds this year, how you play the value game in these ranges is going to be big.
Me and Scott have talked about that actually on a couple of roster reviews. Hey, and if you haven't gotten one, go ahead and get one. Plug. I make this mistake at 110, or just this part of the draft. I look at players and go, well, this is the one that's going to be better. Yeah, but everyone likes this player. And I go, I don't care if everyone likes this player. I want the player that I think is going to be better. Sometimes I'm right. Half the time I'm wrong because, well, I'm picking at 110. Who the hell knows? I should be picking whoever the market values. Like ADP. I shouldn't be going against ADP. You know why? Because ADP is the general consensus. That means that's who the people like. So just draft that player. Figure it out later. If they end up being good, great. Even more better. If they don't end up being great, but you get a little buzz in camp, you just flip them. Even if it's for a 24 first. And you go, all right, I would have done that while I was on the clock anyway. So that works for me. So I know I tend to get a little attached to players at this range of the draft. You really shouldn't, though. Yeah, you really should just be agnostic as possible and just seeing if you can get deals. Obviously, anything after 109, you should be trying to kick to 24. And if it's at 110, I'm in the place where you want to give me a 25 first. Yes, I'm recognizing 2025 as a year that is going to happen. And I would take a 25 first for a 110.
Okay, so tonight we talked about the 110 and kind of the first round in general, but we also did shows on the 101 to 109 before this one. You'll see a playlist that's going to pop over top of Shane's face. Go ahead, click into there, do some binging, and we'll catch you next time.